DESSIN MOGUL.
So I'm just going to start with a couple questions before we toss it out to the audience. Josh Stern, director, let's start with you. What about the Steve Jobs story made you say to yourself, this is a story that I have to tell on film?
Well, I think that, first of all, the notion of taking on this story was so frightening on some level because, Steve sort of, he really became at one point so much bigger than himself. He became so much associated with his products that we all have. So to try to tell the story of a character that was in and of himself an enigma, it was so hard to get a hold of who he really was, yet he represents so much. And for me, I wanted to try to find a way, though not answer every question, especially the questions we don't know, but give the audience a sense of who he was, a feeling of the character. So by the end, the sum total of the whole movie would leave an impression. And I just think that there are very few these men in our history that really that sort of move the needle in the way that he did, and yet we relate to him because he came from a very sort of contemporary place that we all relate to. So it was a mountain, but it was sort of, once you started climbing it, you just sort of had to keep going.
Now, Ashton, this is one of the great minds of recent American history. Tell us about the journey of taking on this role and how you made it happen, how you took it on.
Well, hi everyone. I think you can portray them. You have your lens by which you can see them, and then you try to interpret where they came from and why they did the things they did and how they did the things they did. But you're really only portraying them through the lens that's available to you. And thankfully, because he's an icon, and though he's passed away, he's still living very much in the zeitgeist and very much in the minds and hearts of people who were his friends and colleagues. There was a massive amount of resources that were available to go into it with. There's tons of video footage and audio files, hundreds of hours of audio files that you can pick up and start to get an understanding of who he is. But when you look at that stuff, generally what you find is what he wanted you to think he was, which is very different than maybe who he was. And in order to get to that, I reached out to a bunch of very close friends to his and spent time with them. And then Josh and I really just dug in on who this guy is, what he wants, how is he, what's his true desire, and what's the kind of hole in his heart that he's trying to fill, and always tried to anchor the guy, even when he was doing what seemed like malicious things, anchor it to the need to be loved, and that his proxy, his means of being loved by other people was through creating things that people loved, and when people loved the things he created, he felt loved. And we sort of found that thread and found that chord and just started pulling on it.
Now let's take a few questions from the audience. Right there.
Well, usually when you're playing a character, no matter what character it is, in some ways you're doing somebody. The benefit of playing characters that people don't know is they don't know, and so they don't know when you mess up. I can play my cousin in a character, and nobody knows if I'm doing a good job of playing my cousin or not. But thank you. Appreciate it. Excuse me, sir. We're in the midst of it. But playing this particular character, I think the biggest pressure behind it is that people, and I think Josh probably had the same thing, which is people actually have seen this guy talk. It's not like you're playing Abe Lincoln or something that was it's a real life character that like, I don't know what the fuck Abe Lincoln sounded like. Like, I have no idea. I don't know how he walked. I don't know how he talked. Just as intimidating to play, but you know, there's video footage of this guy, and the impressed image that people have in his head is Steve Jobs giving a keynote that is, you know, talking about, you know, the iPod or the iPhone or whatever it is, because I think that's really the enduring image that most people have of him, and so trying to authentically play him as the guy who I found when I started digging and finding like footage of him at like 25 years old when he's like, oh, am I on TV right now? Are the cameras rolling? Which there's actual like footage of that stuff as well. And then the hippie version of him even before that, and trying to sort of become the guy that became the guy that we knew, that, you know, bowed and didn't, you know, and you know, sort of learn and pick up the little things of like when he went to India, that he probably got, you know, his kind of humble, like when he namaste people when he was on stage. Well, he probably picked that up when he was in India, and like, and starting to put the threads through the little pieces of how he became that guy who's the enduring image. That was probably the most challenging thing. And secondary to that, I have a lot of friends and colleagues and coworkers and people I work with on a daily basis that actually knew him and have like a real personal relationship to him. And I didn't want to disappoint them. Like, I didn't want to like hurt their feelings, and I didn't want to create an image of this guy that they saw as fraudulent. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to do that and do it well.
I think Josh, you know, it's also interesting because Josh played, you know, Wozniak, who's very much a pop cultural figure even now. So, I mean, you want to talk about being Woz, because I thought that was...
I just watched Dancing with the Stars over and over.
It's true.
Until I really got the proper gait down. And then I just studied Ashton Kutcher's cousin for a long time. Filled in the gaps. No, I think that to Ashton's point, you know, there is a sense of... Put it this way, how many of you have seen video of Truman Capote? Raise your hand. Real video of Truman Capote, okay. How many of you have seen video of Freda Kahlo? Raise your hands. I knew it would be you. I knew it would be you. This goody-goody two-shoes over there.
I've seen every documentary video ever made.
I saw the last video of Abraham Lincoln before he was shot. Now, how many of you have seen video of Steve Jobs? Okay, and Steve Wozniak. Okay, so you have this unbelievable, you know, sense of, oh my God, I can't be a fraud. People will look at you and say, well, he didn't sound and walk like that, he didn't talk like that. And then to the same degree, you can't get a face transplant, you can't get a voice transplant. So you have to approximate what that person, what the essence of that person is. And I think that, you know, our job as storytellers is to do all the work. And there were literally hundreds of hours of work that we did to approximate and then let it go. And then tell the story as the director envisions it, as the writer envisions it. And that is, you know, our journey.
Oh, you know, what's interesting as well is that it's not easy. It's very difficult. I mean, I'll tell you that. And I think when you're an actor and you are, we were talking about this, I mean, I was musing on this earlier, that, you know, the night before you're about to shoot a scene, you know it's a pivotal scene, you know you got to be there at 6 a.m., you know it's the most emotional moment and the cathartic moment of the movie, and if you arrive on the day and are not there and focused and in the moment and we have to move on, you didn't get it, and forever the film will live without that moment because you weren't there. It's a very sort of and now you act at that level that you're portraying somebody and you're trying to like get a sense of the character, and am I him? Is that Steve? And you know, there were a lot of moments with Ashton, for example. There's that scene where he fires the guy in the Lisa lab, and it was a very long scene, and we covered it for a very long time. And you know, I really felt he nailed it. But I could see Ashton in the corner. It's that thing the actor gets when he's sort of like, he's sitting there and he just is, and you go up there and you know he's trying to find that moment, and you know it's a strange thing, because you're not only worrying about living the character, but you're trying to also live a character that your conscious mind can't divorce itself from, which is that am I that guy, the guy that you will know. And that's a scene where no matter what I said, because I think he had gotten it, he still felt a little unsettled about it, because and that's the process. And I think with Josh too, there were many moments where it's like, is it too much? Is it too little? And a lot of that comes from our own, the actors are sort of self-editing. So to do these movies, to do any movie, you have to be fully in. But to do this movie, the fear that Ashton was talking about also comes to try to traverse that expectation that you should try to let go, but is always sort of out there in the back of your mind.
And I got the script and I was like, I'm scared of this. I'm terrified of this. This is like, a little like, oh shit, they're really going to see my real colors now. And that excited me. You get that, like those butterflies in your stomach, that you're going to go into the abyss. You're going to take the leap. And I think that as an actor, you want to keep challenging yourself, because otherwise you're never going to grow. And I think to a certain extent, it was a relief to get to play something like this, because I felt a sense of like I was able to take the shackles off of how people generally see me as a really funny guy, or not a very funny guy, and to do something like this, now they can say, oh, he's really skilled as a dramatic actor, or he's terrible as a dramatic actor. It changes the dialogue, and I think that that's exciting as a performer.
I've done some dramatic roles before, and a lot of comedic roles before, and it's interesting, and I get this question a lot, and then the other question I get is, what do you like more, like doing TV, or do you like doing movies? And it's funny, because they're equally challenging in their own ways. Once you've heard a joke, it tends to be less funny the next time you hear it, and so, like, grinding as a comedian to come up with, like, fresh material that is going to be funny again and again and again, really ultimately comes down to, I've found, for the most part, like playing a character that's an authentic character in situations that allow that character to be funny. And then dramatic roles, you're playing a character that is an authentic character in high-pressure, dramatized situations. But what you're trying to do, ultimately, every time is relatively the same from a process point of view, is you're trying to portray a character in a way that you feel is authentic to that character. And if it happens to be funny, we call it comedy, and if it happens to be dramatic, we call it drama. But it's largely the same process with different pressures. Like doing a live television show where you get a script on Monday, and a new script on Tuesday, and a new script on Wednesday, and then you finally get maybe what might be a lock script on Thursday, and you get the actual lock script of 40 pages that you have to memorize and perform in front of a live studio audience on Friday night, is just as pressure-packed as what showing up and doing an emotional scene at 6 a.m. is, just in a slightly different way. And they're both equally really rewarding when you do it well.
I mean, I also think that if you know comedians, at least this is my impression, is that they're actually extremely brooding serious, and that comedy, in my opinion, tends to be usually originally a response. It's a defense towards something. And it's usually whatever has happened or how they've processed life, that their comedy comes as sort of a response to that thing. But that thing, which was the germ of it, is usually very alive and sort of, full of introspection. And if you can tap into that, I think it's actually very powerful. You have to just recognize that. And I also think on some level, when actors start off, their career is going a certain way, and then it takes a left or a right turn, and then a storyline is told. And at some point, they're kind of on that storyline, and you start to believe it. But in my opinion, as a director, you're an actor regardless of what the last 5 or 6 things you've done. If you're right, you're right, you know, as long as Josh was saying it.
Well, I actually saw there was a really cool piece, and it was cool to me when I was studying the guy. Merrill Lynch did this like cover on Steve Jobs when he was about 30 years old, and they did this. He was actually building Next at the time, and he brought like Paul Rand in to like develop a design logo, and they sort of covered him over the process of developing the Next OpenStep processing system and building the computer. And there's this really cool, it's like 15-minute piece of footage on it, and I started to notice that he had like this frenetic energy where he was like shaking his leg quite a bit, and because there were really subtle moments. So there was this Steve Jobs that was turned on and knew it was being filmed. It was pretty collected and calm. And then there was this Steve Jobs that didn't know it was being filmed. And in the one that he didn't know it was being filmed, like he was always playing with his whiteboard marker and doing things with it, and had certain postures and hand gestures that he would constantly do, and when he counted, he would count specifically. I started to pick up like some of those like little specific details, and then when I met with his friend Avi Tavanian, I started just kind of going into character a little bit and asking him like, did Steve really like? Did you ever notice him doing? He's like all the time, like he always did that, and the hand gestures and the various things, and he like would throw the whiteboard marker down on the ground and like pout out of the room, and like just, like various little tiny details that I happened to catch in some video footage, and then confirmed with some of his friends that were behaviors that were his, and then I just started like practicing them and doing them all the time, and then now I can't stop doing it. It's like it's just, you pick up these weird things, and then now I sit at home and I do this, and somebody grabs my leg and goes, "Stop doing that! You're shaking the whole table! Like fucking stop it!" And I'm like, "I'm sorry." And then you kind of
and the people who saw the movie, you know, like Ashton also studied Jobs' walk, which was sort of a lope, and which was great, and you know, and people who knew Steve, a lot of his characterization, which seems simple, but I mean, he did a lot of hand stuff. We had to tone some of it down on some level. I mean, I would, because Steve was very, you know, what you did, you know. So that was all very much out of studying him.
Thank you, gentlemen. How about a round of applause?